Why do highly intelligent people, those who can master complex mathematics, craft beautiful theories, or solve problems that stump the average mind, sometimes embrace ideas that are obviously false? Why do brilliant scientists, engineers, or philosophers end up believing in invisible forces, sacred texts, or divine systems that collapse under the weight of evidence? The paradox is unsettling. The smarter someone is, the more capable they are of constructing elaborate castles of nonsense. At first glance, it doesn't make sense. We're taught to believe that intelligence is a kind of shield against irrationality. We imagine that a person who can design rockets or prove elegant theorems must automatically see through myths, holy claims, and supernatural stories. But human psychology doesn't work like that. Intelligence is not the same as wisdom, and the cleverest people often become the most vulnerable to elaborate illusions. One of the reasons lies in cognitive bias. The smarter a person is, the more skilled they are at rationalizing. If an average person wants to justify a belief, they may rely on gut feelings or borrowed arguments. But a truly intelligent mind can construct intricate, airtight defenses for something completely baseless. Intelligence gives them sharper tools, not necessarily to find truth, but to reinforce what they already want to believe. They can twist logic into shapes that hide contradictions, and they can use language so skillfully that they convince themselves first. Consider confirmation bias. Everyone has it. But for intelligent people, it becomes supercharged. They know how to search selectively, how to pick the strongest sounding evidence, and how to ignore or reinterpret the inconvenient parts. Instead of protecting them from error, intelligence becomes a powerful enabler of error. It's like handing a master architect the wrong blueprint. They'll still build you a flawless structure, only it will stand proudly on a foundation of sand. Another reason has to do with identity. Beliefs are rarely just about facts. They're about belonging. Even the most rational person craves community, meaning, and recognition. A brilliant physicist may still kneel in a church, not because the evidence points to a divine being, but because the ritual binds them to family, culture, or tradition. Smart people are not immune to loneliness. Belief systems offer a ready-made community, a sense of continuity with ancestors, and a promise of purpose. Intelligence can explain away the absurdities because the alternative, standing alone in a vast and different universe, feels unbearable. History is filled with examples. Take Blaise Pascal, a mathematical genius, whose work laid the foundation for probability theory and fluid mechanics. Yet he also clung to religious arguments, famously creating Pascal's wager to defend belief. The wager wasn't built on evidence, but on a calculation of fear and reward. A sharp mind created a clever formula, but the conclusion only reinforced the very thing it should have dismantled. Or, think of Isaac Newton. Few minds in history rivaled his. He gave us calculus, optics, and the laws of motion. But Newton also spent decades obsessing over biblical prophecy, alchemy, and esoteric codes hidden in scripture. His brilliance didn't immunize him against superstition. It amplified his obsession. He used his genius not to dismantle myth, but to weave myth into patterns that seemed scientific. Why does this happen? Partly because intelligence magnifies confidence. Studies in psychology show that smart people are more prone to overestimate their own reasoning. When they construct an argument, they believe in its soundness more firmly than others would. That confidence makes it harder to notice when they've gone astray. Their minds produce convincing stories, and their egos swallow those stories whole. This leads to what some researchers call the intelligence trap. The trap is simple. The smarter you are, the better you are at defending flawed ideas, and the harder it becomes to recognize when you're wrong. Average thinkers may collapse under the weight of contradictions. Brilliant ones can carry those contradictions effortlessly, patching every hole with intellectual cement. But there's another layer. Many of the most intelligent people aren't just thinkers, they're storytellers. They understand narrative, symbolism, metaphor. Religion thrives on storytelling. It isn't just a list of claims, it's a narrative about creation, destiny, morality, and death. A clever mind can take those stories and find elegance, beauty, and hidden codes where there are none. They can recast fiction as philosophy. And because they value complexity, they are often more attracted to systems that seem rich with mystery, even if the mystery is manufactured. One might think that exposure to science and evidence would erode these beliefs, yet the opposite often occurs. Intelligent believers use scientific concepts as decoration. Quantum mechanics becomes a metaphor for the divine. Cosmology is twisted into proof of creation. Neuroscience is reinterpreted as evidence of a soul. They borrow the prestige of science to reinforce the very nonsense that science disproves. What makes this even more interesting is that intelligence is uneven. A person can be a genius in one domain and gullible in another. Newton could split light into colors, but couldn't split myth from fact. A modern doctor might perform life-saving surgeries, yet believe in miracles. Intelligence doesn't generalize across all areas of thought. You can be brilliant in mathematics and blind in metaphysics. This blindness often comes from emotional investment. Smart people don't believe nonsense because they lack reasoning power. They believe it because the nonsense satisfies something deeper. It gives them comfort against death, a moral framework, or the illusion of ultimate justice. They may know intellectually that evidence is absent, but emotionally they choose the belief because it feels better, and then their intelligence works over time to justify that choice. The philosopher Voltaire once said, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities." He wasn't exaggerating. Intelligence doesn't protect against manipulation. In some cases, it makes manipulation more effective. A skilled preacher or guru can appeal to the vanity of an intelligent follower, praising their insight while feeding them half-truths. The follower, proud of their intellect, mistakes flattery for truth. They don't realize they've been seduced, not persuaded. This phenomenon isn't just historical, it's alive today. Look at the number of scientists, engineers, or philosophers who endorse supernatural doctrines or defend religious institutions. Their intelligence gives credibility to nonsense, which then spreads faster. Ordinary people think, if someone so brilliant believes it, it must be true. The cycle reinforces itself. The very presence of smart believers becomes evidence for the belief. But intelligence also carries another danger: arrogance. When someone believes they're too smart to be fooled, that's when they're most vulnerable. They underestimate the power of emotion, tradition, and community. They think their intellect is armor, but it's often a blindfold. They don't realize that intelligence without humility can lead them deeper into illusion than ignorance ever could. So, the paradox stands. The brighter the mind, the more dazzling the illusions it can create. If intelligence doesn't guarantee truth, what does? That question is uncomfortable because it forces us to separate two things we often confuse: mental horsepower and intellectual honesty. A person may have the brain power to memorize entire volumes of philosophy, to juggle abstractions, to debate opponents into silence, yet none of that ensures they will examine their own beliefs with the same sharpness. One of the most fascinating psychological findings is something called motivated reasoning. It means we don't think in order to discover truth. We often think in order to protect the beliefs we already hold. The smarter a person is, the better they are at this mental gymnastics. They'll interpret evidence in ways that defend their worldview, twist statistics to fit their assumptions, and even invent creative loopholes in logic to make contradictions vanish. To them, it feels like honesty. In reality, it's self-defense. Motivated reasoning explains why you can have Nobel Prize winners defending bizarre dogmas or ancient myths. Their minds aren't lazy. They're overactive, working overtime to keep the house of cards from falling. And because their reasoning is sophisticated, outsiders often find it convincing. That's why clever apologetics sound persuasive until you step back and realize the argument was designed not to seek truth, but to preserve belief. Take a moment to imagine a courtroom where the judge, jury, and lawyer are all the same person. That's what motivated reasoning looks like. The intelligent believer constructs the case, evaluates it, and declares themselves victorious. No external challenge is allowed to break the circle. It's airtight, but only because they sealed off every window. Another powerful force is cultural authority. Smart people, like anyone else, grow up inside traditions. If those traditions tell them that sacred texts are infallible or that rituals hold ultimate meaning, they may never even consider questioning the foundation. They don't apply their intelligence to the assumption itself, only to the details that sit on top of it. It's like a brilliant mathematician working out elegant proofs in geometry while never noticing that the axioms were chosen by someone with an agenda. Religion has survived precisely because it adapts to intelligent minds. It doesn't just appeal to emotion or fear, it also offers intellectual puzzles. Theologians craft elaborate systems of interpretation, turning contradictions into mysteries and mysteries into proof of depth. This intellectual scaffolding is what makes belief so sticky. For the average believer, it's enough to hear a story about miracles. For the intellectual believer, it's about the layers, the symbolism, the philosophical framing. Both reach the same conclusion, but by different paths. This is why intelligence can actually make belief stronger. The more a person studies Scripture, the more connections they see. The more philosophy they read, the more they reinterpret doctrines in ways that sound profound. They polish the old myths into something that looks like wisdom. It's not that the myths suddenly contain truth. It's that the intelligent believer has repainted them with the brush of sophistication. Let's look at a modern example: quantum mysticism. The actual science of quantum mechanics is difficult, counterintuitive, and full of paradoxes. Intelligent minds are fascinated by it. But instead of accepting that quantum physics describes particles and probabilities, some reinterpret it as a doorway to spirituality. They claim it proves consciousness shapes reality, or that it points to divine intention. These ideas aren't supported by evidence, but they sound intellectual because they borrow the language of science. The smarter the speaker, the more convincing the illusion. But belief isn't just about arguments, it's also about fear. Even the most rational person can feel terror when facing mortality. Smart people know death is final, yet they long for a loophole. Religion offers one: eternal life, reunion with loved ones, a cosmic justice system. No amount of intelligence erases the emotional weight of death. And when fear speaks louder than reason, the mind becomes its servant. Intelligence simply builds more elaborate masks for that fear. Søren Kierkegaard, though deeply religious himself, once wrote about the leap of faith. He admitted that belief requires abandoning reason at some point. But here's the twist. For many intelligent believers, the leap isn't a single jump. It's a staircase of arguments, each step polished to look rational until the moment they quietly cross into irrationality without noticing. By then, it feels earned, justified, and profound, when in fact it was simply rationalization in disguise. Consider also the role of ego. Intelligent people often see themselves as different from the crowd. When they embrace belief, they don't think they're just another follower. They believe they've discovered a deeper version of the truth, one that ordinary minds can't grasp. They pride themselves on seeing hidden meanings in Scripture, subtle codes in religious language, or symbolic layers missed by others. This sense of superiority makes belief more attractive because it flatters the intellect even as it enslaves it. There's also the issue of compartmentalization. Many brilliant thinkers simply divide their minds into separate zones. In the laboratory, they demand evidence, precision, and logic. But in the sanctuary, they suspend all those rules. They live two intellectual lives, never letting one intrude on the other. The human brain is remarkably good at holding contradictions without feeling discomfort, as long as the contradictions are quarantined in different contexts. And so, a surgeon who trusts science with every scalpel cut can still pray for divine guidance before entering the operating room. This compartmentalization is not a weakness of intelligence. It's a feature of the human brain. Our minds evolved not to pursue truth at all costs, but to survive. If holding contradictory beliefs gave someone an advantage in belonging, cooperation, or comfort, evolution didn't weed it out. In fact, it reinforced it. Intelligence didn't rewrite that programming, it just gave us more tools to manage the contradictions gracefully. One of the clearest demonstrations of this comes from research on cognitive dissonance. When faced with evidence that contradicts a cherished belief, most people experience mental discomfort. Average minds may resolve it by abandoning the belief. Smarter minds, however, are better at reducing the discomfort without changing the belief. They reinterpret the evidence, downplay its importance, or invent creative explanations. Intelligence acts like a defense attorney for nonsense, turning the prosecution's strongest evidence into something harmless. And here's the sobering reality. Intelligence can even make false beliefs harder to challenge from the outside. When you argue with a highly intelligent believer, they don't just parrot slogans. They have rehearsed responses, analogies, and counter-arguments. They may outwit you in debate, not because their position is true, but but because they're better at verbal fencing. Outsiders mistake this skill for correctness, when in fact it's just rhetorical strength. So, intelligence often doesn't cure belief, it reinforces it. It gives believers sharper weapons, stronger walls, and more impressive disguises for nonsense. And the smarter they are, the harder it becomes to break through. There's another dimension that often gets overlooked when discussing why intelligent people cling to irrational beliefs: history. Belief systems don't just exist in isolation. They're carried through generations, passed down as cultural inheritances, reinforced by institutions, and wrapped in traditions so old they feel untouchable. Imagine growing up in a society where questioning certain doctrines isn't just seen as rude, but as dangerous. For centuries, the brightest minds were trained not only in philosophy and science, but also in theology. Entire universities were built around defending faith. If you wanted intellectual respectability, you had to play within those rules. Even geniuses were trapped inside that system. The very act of questioning the wrong doctrine could end careers or lives. Intelligence in those environments didn't point people out of religion. It pushed them deeper into its labyrinth, forcing them to craft ever more subtle defenses. This historical pressure explains why figures like Thomas Aquinas spent their lives building massive theological systems rather than dismantling them. It wasn't because they lacked intelligence. It was because intelligence, when caged inside cultural authority, gets redirected. It builds cathedrals of logic on foundations of sand, and those cathedrals are admired for their architecture, even if the bedrock is myth. But even in modern societies where freedom of thought is safer, intelligent people still fall prey to inherited belief. Family and identity are powerful anchors. A brilliant child raised in a devout household doesn't just learn facts. They absorb the emotional weight of belonging. To question the family's belief can feel like betrayal. Intelligence doesn't erase that emotional bond. Often it just makes the bond more sophisticated, transforming blind faith into what looks like thoughtful conviction. Sociologists have long noted that belief systems function as identity markers. They signal who belongs and who doesn't. And humans, no matter how clever, are tribal creatures. Belief offers a shortcut to solidarity. If the community you rely on shares a doctrine, rejecting that doctrine means risking exile. Even the brightest minds struggle with that price. It's far easier to reinterpret the doctrine, to rationalize it, to fit it into your intellectual framework, than to walk away entirely. This brings us to a striking irony. Some of the most intelligent defenders of religion aren't protecting faith because they believe it's true. They're protecting it because they believe society and needs it. They argue that myths are necessary for morality, that rituals keep communities stable, that people need stories to survive. In other words, they use their intelligence not to prove the supernatural, but to justify keeping the illusion alive. Look at the philosopher William James. While not a blind believer, he argued that religious experience had psychological value, even if its claims couldn't be proved. Or consider modern apologists who openly admit that faith fills an emotional need. Their defense is less about evidence and more about utility. But utility is not truth. A lie that makes people behave nicely is still a lie. Intelligent minds can blur that line, convincing themselves that usefulness is a kind of truth. And then there's the prestige factor. When a highly intelligent person speaks in defense of faith, their reputation lends credibility to nonsense. It's a kind of halo effect. Their brilliance in one domain bleeds into another. The public thinks, if someone that smart believes, maybe I should too. This creates a dangerous cycle where intelligence amplifies nonsense rather than dismantling it. Take C.S. Lewis as an example. He was not a scientist, but a gifted writer and thinker. His defense of Christianity didn't rest on evidence. It rested on storytelling, analogy, and rhetorical flair. His intelligence made the arguments sound profound, even when they collapsed under scrutiny. Generations of readers mistook eloquence for proof. The result? His words became a cornerstone of modern apologetics, despite their lack of substance. This halo effect is powerful because humans trust authority. Research in social psychology shows that people defer to experts even when the expert is speaking outside their field. If a physicist defends theology, their prestige in physics spills over. The public assumes their brilliance guarantees insight everywhere. But expertise is not transferable. You can be a genius in one area and a fool in another. Here's where the paradox deepens. Intelligent people often feel pressure to have answers for everything. When asked about meaning, morality, or existence, they don't want to shrug and say, "I don't know." That humility is difficult. Instead, they reach for belief systems that offer ready-made answers. Their minds then work to polish those answers until they seem intellectually satisfying. But satisfaction is not the same as truth. It's more like a beautifully wrapped package that, once opened, contains nothing. Consider how often religious systems have hijacked the unknown. Before germ theory, plagues were explained as divine punishment. Before astronomy, comets were seen as omens. Each gap in knowledge became an opening for belief. Smart people filled those gaps with intricate explanations, making nonsense look like wisdom. And as science closed the gaps, belief simply retreated and reshaped itself. But the pattern stayed. Intelligence building, castles on. Ignorance. The philosopher Spinoza saw this clearly. He argued that fear of the unknown makes people invent gods, and that priests exploit this fear to gain power. What's fascinating is how timeless this observation is. Even today, intelligent defenders of faith often appeal to mystery. They say the universe must have a designer because it's too complex, or that consciousness proves the existence of a soul. In reality, they're just replacing one unknown with another, calling it an answer when it's only a placeholder. And yet, these arguments persist because they're emotionally satisfying. People crave certainty. They want to feel that the universe has meaning, that justice is real, that death is not the end. Intelligence doesn't erase these desires. If anything, it makes them stronger, because intelligent people are more aware of life's vastness and mortality's weight. They see the abyss more clearly, and belief offers a comforting illusion that the abyss is really a doorway. This is why dismantling belief is so difficult. It's not just about facts, it's about meaning, identity, community, and comfort. Intelligent people, with all their brilliance, are still human. They still fear, they still long, they still want to belong. And when faced with the choice between a cold truth and a warm illusion, many choose the illusion, and then use their intelligence to make that choice look respectable. So the real paradox isn't just that smart people believe nonsense, it's that their intelligence often makes the nonsense stronger, more attractive, and harder to challenge. Psychology offers some of the clearest insights into why brilliant people believe in things that crumble under scrutiny. Researchers have studied how intelligence interacts with bias, and the results are often unsettling. Instead of protecting against error, intelligence can actually predict more sophisticated forms of self-deception. One famous example comes from the work of Dan Kahan at Yale Law School. He studied how people interpret scientific data when it touches on politically or morally charged issues. What he found is that higher intelligence doesn't make people more objective. It makes them better at interpreting evidence in ways that confirm their existing beliefs. In one experiment, participants were shown data about the effectiveness of a skin cream. Everyone could read the numbers correctly. But when the exact same numbers were relabeled as data about gun control, suddenly people's reasoning collapsed. The smarter the participant, the more creatively they twisted the math to protect their political identity. Intelligence wasn't leading them to truth. It was giving them sharper tools to defend their biases. Now, replace politics with religion. The same mechanism applies. A smart believer doesn't look at evidence neutrally. They approach it with a vested interest. And their intelligence allows them to reinterpret contradictions until the belief survives intact. They don't abandon the doctrine when faced with disconfirming facts. They double down, using all their mental power to reshape reality until it fits. This explains why debates with intelligent believers often feel like running on a treadmill. No matter what evidence you provide, they have a response. Miracles are redefined as metaphors. Contradictions are reframed as mysteries. Atrocities in Scripture are explained away as context. Their intelligence produces an endless supply of escape routes. What looks like open-minded inquiry is actually a maze designed to keep them inside. A related phenomenon is the backfire effect. When smart people are confronted with evidence against their cherished belief, they don't weaken in their conviction. They often strengthen it. The dissonance is so uncomfortable that their brain compensates by reinforcing the belief more strongly. It's as if reason is a spring. Push it down with facts, and it snaps back even higher with certainty. This is one reason why attempts to deconvert intelligent believers by brute force argument often fail. The very pressure of facts makes their nonsense feel more sacred. But psychology doesn't just reveal the traps, it also explains the motives. Humans are storytelling animals. We don't just want data, we want narratives that make sense of life. Smart people, perhaps more than anyone, crave coherence. They can't stand a worldview that feels fragmented or meaningless. Religion exploits this by offering a complete package, an origin story, a moral framework, a purpose, and an afterlife. To an intelligent mind hungry for order, that package is irresistible. It's not the truth they're buying, it's the structure. Consider the research on patternicity, the human tendency to see patterns even where none exist. Evolution wired us this way. Our ancestors who assumed a rustling bush might hide a predator survived more often than those who ignored it. But in the modern world, this survival instinct becomes a liability. Intelligent people are particularly skilled at spotting connections. They see meaning in coincidences, codes in scriptures, or hidden design in nature. Their ability to detect patterns, normally a strength, becomes a doorway to superstition. The same applies to what psychologists call agency detection. Humans are prone to assuming intent behind events. If something bad happens, we ask, who caused this? Belief systems exploit that instinct, offering a divine agent as the answer. Intelligent people don't escape this. They just construct more sophisticated versions of it. Instead of saying a storm was caused by an angry god, they might say it was part of a divine plan too subtle for mortals to understand. The core irrationality is the same, only the vocabulary changes. There's also the matter of cognitive style. Research suggests that intelligence correlates with analytical thinking, but not always. With reflective thinking. In other words, smart people are good at solving problems presented to them, but they're not always good at questioning the assumptions behind those problems. A brilliant mathematician can solve equations about celestial motion while still assuming the universe was created in 6 days, because they never apply the same critical lens to that belief. Reflection, humility, and willingness to doubt are separate qualities from intelligence. The problem becomes even clearer when you look at cults. Cult leaders often target intelligent recruits, not just the gullible. Why? Because intelligent people are better at rationalizing the group's doctrines once they're inside. They become articulate defenders, crafting complex justifications that attract others. Their intelligence doesn't make them immune to cults, it makes them more valuable to cults. History is filled with examples of scientists, philosophers, and professionals lending credibility to movements that, in hindsight, were absurd. Take the case of Jonestown in the 1970s. Many of Jim Jones's followers were well-educated, socially conscious individuals who wanted to create a utopian community. They weren't fools, they were idealists, often highly intelligent, who rationalized each step deeper into delusion until it ended in tragedy. Their brilliance didn't protect them, it was weaponized against them. Or consider modern conspiracy theories that attract scientists and engineers. These people can design spacecraft, write code, or analyze data with skill, yet still fall for narratives about hidden elites or divine interventions. Their technical brilliance doesn't prevent them from succumbing. It often fuels the delusion. They use their expertise to cherry-pick data, to construct elaborate models, to give nonsense a veneer of technical legitimacy. The lesson here is stark. Intelligence and truth-seeking are not the same. Intelligence is a tool. Truth-seeking is a discipline. Without humility, self-awareness, and the willingness to question even our deepest comforts, intelligence becomes just another way of decorating falsehood. And here's the crux. Nonsense persists, not because people are stupid, but because people are human. Even the smartest among us are vulnerable to fear, ego, belonging, and the need for meaning. Intelligence doesn't erase those drives, it amplifies them. And when belief taps into them, no amount of raw brainpower guarantees escape. Institutions have always known how to harness intelligence for their own survival. Religious systems in particular have a long history of recruiting the brightest minds, not to dismantle the faith, but to defend it. Theologians, philosophers, and even scientists have been enlisted to add a veneer of sophistication to doctrines that otherwise collapse under their own weight. This strategy isn't accidental, it's deliberate. Institutions understand that the average believer is persuaded by authority. When a respected thinker lends their name to a doctrine, it spreads faster. The arguments don't need to be airtight, they just need to sound intelligent. Once the reputation of a brilliant person is attached, the belief gains a second life. Think about medieval universities. They weren't built to question faith, they were built to refine it. The brightest students were trained in theology, taught to reconcile scripture with philosophy, to polish contradictions until they looked like wisdom. This wasn't pursuit of truth, it was damage control. Religion learned early that if it couldn't silence intelligent dissenters, it could recruit them, absorb their intellect, and redirect it toward apologetics. We see this pattern even now. When scientists or philosophers embrace belief, religious institutions amplify their voices. They are presented as proof that intelligence and faith can coexist, as if coexistence itself were evidence of truth. The reality is much simpler. Intelligence doesn't protect against bias, and institutions know it. By elevating intelligent believers, they reinforce the illusion that belief is rational. But the exploitation doesn't stop there. Religion evolves to appeal specifically to intelligent minds. For ordinary followers, it offers stories, rituals, and community. For intellectuals, it offers complexity. Entire branches of theology exist not to convert the uneducated, but to give the educated something to chew on. Sophisticated doctrines, symbolic interpretations, and philosophical justifications are like intellectual bait. They keep smart people engaged, convincing them that their faith is deeper, more refined, more true than the crude versions held by the masses. This dual structure, simple myths for the many, elaborate systems for the few, has been religion's survival mechanism for centuries. The surface is accessible, but beneath it lies a labyrinth designed for thinkers. And once inside, those thinkers often become the most passionate defenders, because they feel they've uncovered hidden depths that outsiders cannot see. The complexity flatters their intellect, binding them tighter to the very nonsense they might otherwise reject. Consider how some traditions reinterpret outdated doctrines rather than abandon them. Stories once meant literally are reframed as metaphor. Contradictions are rebranded as mysteries. Harsh commandments are softened into allegories. This evolution doesn't happen to preserve truth. It happens to preserve relevance. Intelligent minds who would otherwise walk away are given enough room to reinterpret until they can keep both their reason and their faith. The system adapts to them, ensuring its own survival. But adaptation comes at a cost. Each new layer of reinterpretation makes the belief system more unfalsifiable. The moment one explanation is dismantled by evidence, another, more abstract one takes its place. Intelligent believers become trapped in an endless cycle of reinterpretation, always moving the goalposts just far enough to keep the core intact. From the outside, it looks sophisticated. From the inside, it feels profound. In reality, it's just a self-repairing illusion. To see how powerful this can be, look at how religion responds to science. When Darwin proposed evolution, many believers rejected it outright. But some intelligent theologians worked to reconcile it with faith, creating the idea of theistic evolution. This hybrid view doesn't solve the contradiction, it papers over it. But for many intelligent believers, it's enough. They don't have to choose between science and faith. They can pretend both fit together, even when the fit is artificial. Religion survives not by defeating science, but by absorbing it into its narrative. The same happens with cosmology. As evidence for the Big Bang grew, religious thinkers rebranded it as proof of divine creation. Never mind that the science doesn't imply a creator. The existence of a beginning was enough for apologists to claim victory. Again, intelligence wasn't used to challenge the nonsense. It was used to retrofit the nonsense with a new disguise. Breaking free from this cycle requires more than intelligence. It requires courage. It means being willing to admit that cherished beliefs may be wrong, that comfort isn't the same as truth, that belonging sometimes demands conformity to illusions. These are heavy costs, and many intelligent people are unwilling to pay them. It's easier to stay inside, to keep polishing the story, to keep pretending the structure makes sense. Yet some do escape. What sets them apart isn't raw intelligence, it's intellectual humility. They're willing to doubt themselves, to question their own motives, to admit that even brilliant arguments can be nothing more than clever rationalizations. They see the difference between complexity and truth, between usefulness and reality, and they accept that living without comforting illusions is harder, but more honest. There's a famous line by Spinoza: "The highest activity a human being can attain is learning for understanding, because to understand is to be free." That freedom doesn't come from intelligence alone. It comes from the willingness to let go of illusions, no matter how sophisticated they seem. So the question isn't why smart people believe nonsense. The question is why only some of them find the strength to stop. The strange relationship between intelligence and nonsense raises an important question. If even the brightest minds are vulnerable, what does it take to actually escape? The first ingredient is self-awareness. Smart people often mistake their reasoning power for objectivity. They forget that the same brain that can solve equations is also capable of rationalizing falsehoods. Recognizing this vulnerability is the beginning of freedom. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once warned that the whole problem with the world is that fools are cocksure and the intelligent are full of doubt. Doubt here is not a weakness, it's a discipline. It prevents intelligence from becoming arrogance and arrogance from becoming delusion. The second ingredient is emotional honesty. Many intelligent believers don't stay in religion because of arguments. They stay because of comfort. They fear death. They crave justice. They long for belonging. These are deeply human needs, but unless they admit that their belief is rooted in these desires, they'll keep pretending it's about evidence. Escaping nonsense means facing those fears directly, without wrapping them in supernatural illusions. It means acknowledging that some questions don't have neat answers, and that meaning is something we create, not something handed down from above. The third ingredient is intellectual humility. Intelligence without humility is dangerous. It creates eloquent defenders of falsehood. But humility allows us to admit when we're wrong, to recognize the limits of our knowledge, and to prefer truth over comfort. This humility is rare precisely because it's painful. It strips away illusions and leaves us with a universe that may be vast, indifferent, and silent. But in that silence lies a different kind of dignity, the dignity of living authentically, without self-deception. There are countless real-world examples of intelligent people who broke free. Some were scientists who realized that their religious explanations contradicted the evidence. Others were philosophers who noticed that their theological systems were nothing more than word games. Some were ordinary people, armed not with brilliance, but with the courage to question. What they share is not raw intelligence, but a willingness to let go of comforting lies. This distinction matters. Intelligence is a tool. Like fire, it can illuminate or it can burn. It can expose illusions or it can defend them. What determines the outcome is not the sharpness of the mind, but the honesty of its owner. When intelligence is paired with honesty, it becomes a weapon against nonsense. When it's paired with fear, ego, or tradition, it becomes nonsense's most loyal servant. Religious institutions know this. That's why they work so hard to keep their intelligent members inside. They provide complexity for the thinkers, comfort for the fearful, community for the lonely, and moral certainty for the anxious. It's a comprehensive package designed to trap every kind of mind. Breaking free isn't just an intellectual act. It's a rebellion against an entire system that thrives on your compliance. And yet, escape is possible. The first step is realizing that intelligence alone won't save you. You must be willing to confront yourself, to ask, am I believing this because it's true or because it feels good? Am I following the evidence or am I bending the evidence to fit what I want to believe? These questions are uncomfortable, but they are liberating. When smart people finally turn that sharp lens inward, when they question not just the beliefs, but the very reasons they want those beliefs to be true, that's when the illusions collapse. What remains is not despair, but clarity. A universe that doesn't revolve around us. A morality that comes from our choices. A meaning we carve out with our own hands. And perhaps the greatest irony is this. Only when intelligence stops serving nonsense does it truly fulfill its purpose. The brilliance of the human mind was never meant to polish myths. It was meant to uncover reality, to strip away illusions, and to face existence honestly. That, and nothing else, is what makes intelligence worthy of admiration. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think intelligence is more often a shield against nonsense, or a trap that reinforces it?